Fañch Bihan-Gallic. Hello, everyone who's watching this video today. Quite excited to be on the phone with somebody who is in the mornings, his evening here, calling all the way from Mexico. Are you? Chris, who's recently, a few months ago, got out a great book about Jalisco, Nahuatl, or Mexicano. We're going to talk about the book in a moment, but Chris, can you tell us a bit about yourself first so that we get to know you?
Kema nehimo toka Chris Cuauhtli, Nahuatl tamoso de Jalisco, Onislacat, y panse altepetz in tepichi y toka soy clan de afuera, tinte mastiani, panimo mastiani. Well, what I said was my name is Chris Cuauhtli. I'm from Tamazula, Jalisco, from a little area called Soyatlan de Afuera. That's where I was born. And I am a teacher, and I am also a student. And so I've been working on the revitalization of my language and the variant spoken within our region.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a bit about your work then? So about that specific variant and what language it is, and for people that might not be familiar with it.
So Nahuatl in general is probably the most well-known and largest indigenous language in Mexico. It's traditionally located in 14 states, I believe, but it's made up of many different variants or dialects, as some people would say. In Mexico, there's kind of a stigma against referring to indigenous languages as dialects, but from a linguistic perspective, obviously there are dialects. So dialects are variants. Jalisco is one, which is referred to as a Western peripheral variant of Nahuatl. Within our region, we don't call it Nahuatl per se. We call it Mexicano. This is a colonial term, but it's one that's been adopted by the community over hundreds of years and that we continue to use. People may be more familiar with variants like the classical Nahuatl from the Aztecs, or Huasteca Nahuatl from the eastern region of Mexico. So there are similarities, but there's a lot of differences. There's differences in the phonemes, the pronunciation. There's differences in grammar, and there's differences in words. We may have the same word, but it may have a different meaning or usage.
And I mean, for people watching that obviously speak European language like English, we actually unknowingly, many of us use Nahuatl every time we're mostly in the kitchen.
Right.
I'm always amazed at the number of fruits and vegetables that obviously came with colonization from the Americas that have Nahuatl name. If I remember, tomato, avocado, all of these words. So people often don't realize the number of borrowings that Nahuatl gave European languages, such as English or French.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, that's for you. So it's quite interesting. So you're mentioning the fact that there is this great variety, that Nahuatl in a way is not so much a language as a continuum of languages that are all related. In the revitalization of these variants of Nahuatl in Mexico, is there any tension between going for a more unified form of the language, which is what seems to sometimes appear as, Nahuatl, the language of the Mexica and these sort of things, and grassroots work that is more focused on the local variants and what people actually daily speak? Is there such tension?
I would say there is, because within our region specifically, so we at this time we have no more fluent speakers, so it's considered a moribund language. The last fluent speakers probably died in the late 1980s, early 1990s. So although we call it a revitalization, in a way, I guess I was listening to one of my mentors talk about this, and it's not so much as revitalization because there's no speakers, but we're kind of reclaiming it and rebuilding it. So this process actually started in the 1980s at the request of the local leadership elders, if you will. But what occurred was they brought in speakers from other region, from the Huasteca. And in the beginning, these people were not accepted, as there were still people that realized this is not our language. It's not really similar at all. But so they tried again. So what happened now is that we have this variant being taught in the schools, and a lot of the local people, they're not aware that this is actually not our variant. It's not our language, because when you hear Nahuatl, people think, like English. Oh, English, one language. But there is a little tension in because you would, in trying to revitalize our actual language, we're going to be displacing the system that's been already in place, teaching and in a way passing itself as our language, when in fact it's not. So there's a little tension there. And then of course within the academia, there's not really any tension, but there's been a lot more focus on these other variants, other languages.
Yeah, is there the mention of academia is interesting because I don't really know how it is on your side of the pond, but here a lot of the revitalization of Celtic languages is spearheaded quite often by academics, people that have sought solutions and gone to academia for it. And there is this weird mix of, on the one hand, academics are very highly involved in revitalization, and on the other hand, they're not always in touch with people on the ground that just happen to speak the language and just care about their culture and heritage. How do academics sit in that revitalization movement in your context?
Well, I would say in Jalisco per se, that there is no revitalization move. There was no revitalization movement. There was an attempt by some people within academia and the government and just regular other Nahuatl speakers to teach their variant, but I don't consider that revitalization, because they're just bringing a variant from another region and teaching it. So there was no, but I will say that the academics, the linguists, the archaeologists, all those within that sphere that have come into the region, none of them have tried to maybe one have tried to Rosa Yanes, I'll mention her, have tried to revitalize the language. It's just been documenting, this is how, just documentation, it's a dying language, but nothing's done other than the person I just mentioned who did help write a children's book and do some work in the community.
I think it's the context of Jalisco is something that would echo, I think, for many people here in the Celtic speaking world, because we have so here in Scotland we speak Scottish Gaelic, which is still spoken. It's endangered, but there are loads of daily speakers, including some children, and it's the same with Irish. But there is the Isle of Man between Scotland and Ireland, in which, funnily enough, it's in the 80s that the last native speaker died. But since then, it has been documented, and people have been revitalizing it. And now, even though the Isle of Man is not Manx speaking anymore, you have kids being raised in the language again. And they could have, you could have had this weird situation maybe where Irish or Scottish Gaelic would have been taught in their schools. And that would be the same situation of, yes, it's the same origin, but it's not what they actually spoke. That's not what happened. And they're revitalizing their variant. And now you can, I've heard kids speak it, and it's starting again slowly. So I think what, the situation you're in Jalisco is something that would echo very much with us thinking about Manx, and it, it's an uphill battle, but they're doing it. So
Right.
Obviously from our perspective, like, we can totally look at it as, yeah, you'll do it. Like, they done it, there is no reason why you wouldn't. So it kind of brings us, I guess, to your book then. So this big one that has quite an interesting collection of many things. The first chapter, for me as a linguist, as an academic, first chapter was quite fascinating because you are actually going in a fairly accessible way, I find, through the process, kind of very transparently telling the reader, here is how this book was built. Here is the work I've done. So you're getting, I'm telling you what you're getting, basically. Can you tell us about the inception of this book? If I'm getting it right, Ma Tiahtucan Mexicano.
Oh, yes. Ma Tiahtucan Mexicano. That's good. Yes, that's correct. And that just means let's speak Mexicano. So this started maybe 7 years ago. The idea, and then just the manuscript. It was all handwritten at that time, and then I transferred it onto the computer. So I tried to make it as accessible as possible without a lot of the linguistic jargon. In the beginning, I like, as you mentioned, I explained how this book was created. I didn't want people to say, because it's a reconstruction in part, because we don't have a full lexicon, we don't have a full language, so we have to reconstruct in part. But there's a process to do that, I think, not just, okay, we borrow this word, we borrow that word. No, we want to do a comparative analysis and then reconstruct the whatever words we have to, but following the grammatical rules of the language. And I wanted to show how that process was done for parts that were reconstructed. A lot of the material was conflicting because it was written by just some professional linguist, some priest, some other layperson, and all of them have substantial contributions. But I think this is one of the things that made it so difficult for us to try to revitalize the languages, because the material was very complex. The linguistic part was very complex to understand, and then the other, and it was contradicting each other. It seemed to contradict each other, especially the work written by the local priest. His book, which is pretty much the only book you'll in Spanish you'll come across. The other ones are articles, and it's referred to as a grammar. But unfortunately, this book is after studying this book for 6 years, it's a complete fabrication of the language, and plagiarized many other sources from languages unrelated, and from some older manuscripts that were written 300 years prior. So people that would be thinking, okay, I'm going to get this book and use it to learn the local variant or a variant of within the region, they would in fact not be learning the language at all. He wrote it at a time probably he thought nobody would ever be able to compare the other sources, because it was written in like the 50s, 1965 it came out. So that was one of the reasons I felt like I needed to do this work, because there was so much misinformation also.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's quite interesting too. I guess if you did it at the time where the language was already leaving the communities, you wouldn't have had, if you were to do something like that here, I mean, you would have thousands of fluent speakers that would just come out saying, this is not our language. So even though you do find it a lot with people that will look at maybe your language. I suppose it must happen with Nahuatl as well. It happens a lot with Celtic languages. Look at it as a mystical thing. It's not a language that actual people speak. It's this magical kind of noble savage item. And the number of things sometimes you see online and you're thinking, this is just a mishmash of languages that has nothing to do with us. So it's quite interesting. It's quite good for you that you've actually noticed that in your work and are able to then inform people better that might not know it any better. Well, now they do have a resource to use anyway that is based on actual academic work. So
yeah, I'll just add what you just mentioned. So within our region, we've been dealing since the inception or since first contact with the Spanish. We've been dealing with the idea that our language was not a real language, or it was a corruption of the real language. So they referred to our language for a few hundred years as Mexicano corrupto, or corrupt Mexican language, or in other terms related to that. And this priest is one of them as well. So there was a constantly trying to impose the rules and the style of central Nahuatl, the classical Nahuatl, which was used by the Spanish as to govern and control and to evangelize the people. And so that's what he did. He was imposing things that were totally contrary to the actual language and grammar. And by doing that, he committed a great disfavor to the preservation of the language. It's sad because he knew the language, because there's actual recordings of him speaking the language, but it doesn't reflect his book.
That's quite interesting. How well, I mean, I suppose anybody familiar with any indigenous language revitalization will know how ideology can really wreak havoc in some of the work. It's kind of thinking in the line of that that relation between classical and dialectal or variant Nahuatl. I'm noticing, going through your book and comparing it to other Nahuatl sources I've looked at, that the spelling is quite recognizably Nahuatl. It's not radically different from other spelling systems, but it does have its own. You've clearly made some conscious choices in that spelling to reflect, I suppose, your dialect. Can you tell us a bit about the way you approach spelling in your book?
So right now, within the Nahuatl speaking community, there's kind of a discourse on what to use as a spelling. Traditionally, Nahuatl has utilized basically Spanish alphabet system for spelling. I've kind of kept in line with that tradition because the majority of literature that's accessible to people uses that. So today, but many communities today, they'll lose like a J instead of an H for like a glottal stop or a fricative, or they'll use a K instead of the Spanish Q, U, or other or a C. So I've stuck with, and I mentioned in the book, the ACK orthography, which was kind of conventionalized by Andrews and Cartoonin. But I've had to make some changes with regard to sounds that are not found in classical language, namely the devoiced L. So the devoiced L which is you're probably familiar with. It's found in Welsh, and many other languages, but it's not well known to English or Spanish speakers. And I've had to use an L with the line through it to reflect that. And some writers didn't. They would just use they would use other conventions, which was some confusing to some people. I think that's the main thing I had to use. And then, just in the orthography part, explaining we have a R in this variant, but this doesn't represent the same R as in Spanish, like a trilled R or something like that.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's quite. So it's a kind of an orthography that is clearly not going to shock anybody who might be familiar with Nahuatl, but that will still help people learning not get confused and actually focus on the variant you're trying to teach.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, kind of a broader question, but what you've put your work out there, you've put this book out there.
Mm-hmm.
How do you hope people will use it? What would you like this book to be used for?
So my hope is to have this book or a variant of this book, or somehow this book used within the creating some kind of classes or systems, maybe in the schools. And I'm in the process of reaching out and speaking to some of the teachers who teach Nahuatl within so it's Nahuatl is being taught in about four of the schools within different little towns, but they're all teaching Huasteca Nahuatl. And so I don't know how this conversation is going to go, but I'm going to offer the resources, and then until I'm in a position to actually to teach myself, that's the hope. The English version is available, and the Spanish version is also available online, but I've also offered the Spanish version for free to anybody that wants it. So there's a PDF version available of the Spanish for free, because I feel like the revitalization is for the community and it should be accessible to the community. And the economic situation here is person can not afford even $20 book. This is like a full day's pay for our average person. So hopefully there's still a few other things that need to be done before we can proceed. I think the dictionary and a few other sources, and then I think we could jump start into some classes.
You were mentioning actually just before we started recording the dictionary. Can you tell a little bit about that's work in progress currently, but can you tell a little bit about that?
Right. So I'm just editing the final copy, but this book is based on the dictionary. Without the dictionary, nothing could be, and it's an analytical dictionary. So it's looking at, for example, I take let's say one word, and how this one word, for example, I'll say the word for church, right? Teopan or Tiupan. And every way that this word is recorded by every single investigator, I do the citation. And sometimes they may spell it wrong, which distorts the actual pronunciation. So by comparing all of these, then we come to the citation form, and comparing all of their translations with what we know from the language actual should mean. Then we have the translation, but it's compared, use the citations from all the investigators, and then below that is citations from local living variants and the colonial grammars that we have. So it's like a really concise analytical reference. So anybody could look up the word, and really, if they just studied that one word, the paragraph, they have a really good understanding of what this word means.
How many entries do you have in?
I don't know. I
A lot.
haven't look. It's about 500 pages
All right.
so
Yeah.
far. It's about 500 pages. So I think it will probably be about 4 times or 3 times.
Yeah. A few thousand entries probably.
You're right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's yeah, quite a piece of work then.
Yes, it's I kind of it's in a way it's kind of like my life work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that sounds exactly like what something like that would be. It's quite
Yeah.
impressive. Do you have you're mentioning the schools and hoping that will be a next step. Do you already have kind of a small group of people working with you or in relationship with you on revitalizing that variant? Is it for now like your life's work, or are there already some people kind of gearing up to do that?
Unfortunately, it's just been me at this time. I have offered and reached out to anybody and everybody, and it's not easy. So you have people that, oh yeah, I'll do it and I'll help you, or I want to be involved, but nobody has stepped forward really to be involved in an extensive manner. So, but this next month I'm going to be meeting with some professors from the University of Guadalajara, and we're going to see what we can do. They have more contacts, but I've reached out to, and like I said, anybody that wants to. I've had a lot of requests for classes, and that's why this book uh, was written, because a lot of people are constantly asking me questions. So I kind of rushed through trying to finish it,
Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah. So the interest is there, but it's about getting the logistics of it, and
Right. There's an interest. The thing about Nahuatl is, if you're not from this region, this language really doesn't pertain to you as far as like being an ancestral language, right? So there is a lot of people, and a lot of people don't understand that. And so I'll teach anybody. I don't care where you're from, but um, some some people when I think it's more easier for them also to just learn another variant, you know. So we're trying to educate as well as teach.
oh yeah, this sort of work it's slow going, but as you get the word out there, like chances are uh, it will pick up pace. Are there a few other people like yourself who are fairly fluent or at least conversational in that variant, particularly now, like learners or that you know of?
No,
No. Yeah. So
no, just my daughter.
yeah.
That's it. There's no, because again, partially maybe my fault because we haven't had a class, but I have taught Nahuatl before for many years. I've taught classes in classical in Huasteca. I'm not a fluent Huasteca speaker, but I have a understanding of it enough that to lead some classes that people have requested using Jan's book. Shout out Jan Garcia's book. Um, but yeah, there's nobody yet.
Aye. Well, I know what you mean. Same here with some dialects. There will maybe be one family or two that are like actively keeping it alive, but getting people involved in actually learning that variant is a bit tough. Kind of following up on that, what do you reckon? Say somebody already speaks to a fair degree some Nahuatl, say Huasteca, or Guerrera, or some other variants, and they were thinking, well, you know what? I'm actually from Jalisco. I want to learn. I would like to speak that dialect. How do you reckon the transition would be for somebody who already has some command of Nahuatl to go from that other variants they already have learned to switching to Jalisco?
Oh, I think I think within the central Mexico variants, it would be easy,
Yeah.
easy. Um, I would say, I would add, if the coastal Michoacan Nahuatl, which is next to us, this is pretty much the same variant. I would say 85%, 80%, let's say 80% the same, and that's a very vibrant language. Children growing up speaking it, so they would have the easiest time. And if you learn this variant, you would be technically you would be able to understand them very well as well. But I think across within the central variants, you could easily transition from one to the other.
Will it be a bit tougher for somebody that would speak? Well, we've been mentioning Huasteca a lot because it's one of the most widely spoken, one of the strongest variants, isn't it? And for people who might not know the geography of Mexico, Huasteca is east coast. It's really much on the other side from Jalisco, isn't it?
Right.
So somebody like that, would it be maybe a bit tougher than the central variants, or?
I don't know. I think I've studied too much to to be able to say okay, but I don't think so. Huasteca Nahua is unique in some aspects, but I think well, Western now, Jalisco now, Colima now, they're considered more closely related to Central Nahuatl. So like Mexico City region, Morelos. But I don't think they would have a problem understanding it.
All right. Oh yeah. So it's So anybody watching right now that does speak Nahuatl and think, I would like to speak Jalisco, wouldn't be tough for you to do it. So go for it. Get the book.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you reckon people in your community and in your area could do to help? Obviously, there is learning the language, right? But what do you think people could do to help you in your work?
Well, I think besides learning, asking questions help promote some of the work. Like if we do a video on how something's said, share it, but learn it and maybe learn it yourself and create your own, because we live in this digital age. We have to use the technology. Unfortunately, I'm not in Jalisco at this moment. I'm in northern part of Mexico. I'm going back on the 30th of this month. So this is like another problem because I'm not on the ground all the time in the community. So this is something I've been thinking of. To move from one place to another is not easy, but it's something I feel like I'm going to have to do this next year.
Yeah, we have some people working with our organization that would entirely relate to you in that. It's as far away as we might be, many people are in the same situation you're in. Like language revitalization is everyday work, isn't it? In that idea, so you have obviously people in your area. What about? Do you think there is something other people in other communities can do? Because obviously there is so much contact nowadays. It's marvelous. You're talking about the digital age. Recently here, our group welcomed some Anishinaabe people. And last year in Glasgow, some people from the Amazon. And we often, have contact with Sami people. We've had contact with Cherokees. It's this strange in between where all together, like all individually, we're quite weakened by colonization, by ignorance, by so many layers of history. And at the same time, we've never been so connected. So it gives us this strength that Is there anything that other communities that are not the Jalisco communities, that are not the Nahuatl community, anything people like us basically can do to support your work?
Oh, definitely. And just by doing the work that they're doing is an inspiration towards other people. Like for myself, I think one of my greatest inspirations was with the Wampanoag language from the eastern part of the U.S. Um, they have exact similar situation, and the professor Little Doe, she's a member of that indigenous nation. She basically did what I'm doing, but then the community got behind her, and they were able to revitalize just using the vocabulary's text. They had the Bible printed in their language. It's a documentary I often watch over and over,
Yeah.
and it inspires me. But doing that, what you're doing here, platforming, sharing, but more than that is, I would say, also to share resources.
Mm-hmm.
How do we do things? How can we create, like, especially for me, I need help. How do I create an app?
Yeah.
How do we do this? I don't know how to do any of those things. And there's other people also. So resources, sharing whatever resources, information, ideas.
Right. Oh yeah, I understand totally what you mean, because that's so often like that. I mean, I'm not a Gael myself. I'm not from Scottish Highlands. I'm from another Celtic language. But here I am, living in a Gaelic speaking community, and I have friends whom I speak to in Scottish Gaelic who are not from here either.
Mhm.
They're from other countries, and people come with their experience and then they leave with their experience. And so this exchange is important. And I know that there are so many things done, especially in the Americas, in Canada, the US, and Mexico. I've been watching so much of what's done, and it's so inspirational what some people are doing. And given how far they're coming, because obviously here in Europe, there's been loads of suffering, like old people here in this village just around my house that were beaten at school for speaking the
Right.
language. Still today, that will open a newspaper and have an entire column explaining why they're inferior citizens. But despite all that, we didn't have to go through some of the most physically violent things that people on the other side of the pond went through.
Right.
So seeing how languages can come back sometimes from atrocious things like genocide that's such a show of strength and resilience, and showing how colonization makes you look strong, but really you can't beat a people. So yeah, sharing good practice, as they say in academia, but being aware of each other and helping promote each other's work. And that's why we like to talk to people like you and be like, yeah, get the book, learn Jalisco Nahuatl, if you want to learn about that language. And I mean, the doors it opens, when I started looking into Nahuatl a few years ago, it's all of it, all of the variants, all of the history of the language and the people. It gives you such a different vision of Mexico, which is often seen from abroad as, it's a food. Everybody knows Mexican food. And, maybe you have a few films in mind, but all of a sudden, through the indigenous languages, you get a country that is way beyond anything you can ever imagine, and all of the mosaic of cultures and languages. And it's not just people who think of the Aztecs. It's more than that. It's so much more. So yeah, learn Nahuatl, learn Jalisco Nahuatl, pick up that book and go for it. I guess.
If I could add something to just really quick. So for those who are Nahuatl speakers already of whatever variant, and they're involved in teaching, or they're not, there's many that are involved in teaching. They would do a great service by learning Jalisco Nahuatl and using their background in Nahuatl to help teach and promote. and that's what I'm hoping, because a lot of the I'm not gonna say names, but a lot of the guys and women, men involved in the teaching Nahuatl um, within the English speaking communities, the majority of them are actually from Jalisco
Yeah. Oh, is
descent.
that? Yeah.
So if they could utilize all their knowledge to come help, that would be like a great service to spread, to promote it, because within Nahuatl, it's like every 20 years there's a shift. 20 years ago, there was nobody speaking about Huasteca Nahuatl. They spoke only about classical Nahuatl. Then it was Guerrero Nahuatl. Now it's Huasteca Nahuatl. But each phase allows that variant to grow, resources to be created. So maybe it's time for us to start looking at the more severely endangered ones and utilize our resources.
So you think that maybe that's something the diaspora could play a role in?
Yes, because
Yeah.
they're in a way they're spearheading it. I think
Mhm.
even in because what happens there in the U.S. is it has a large effect, especially with regards to languages.
All right. Yeah, that's a good one for the English speakers and watching us
Hmm.
from maybe California and around there.
Hmm.
Talking about good practice and sharing between indigenous people, do you have an advice as somebody who has the experience you have and who's done the work you have in dialect revitalization? Do you have any advice to give to somebody who is working to revitalize their variants of a language that might be maybe ignored?
Hmm. The greatest advice, biggest piece of advice I can give you is not to wait on somebody else to do the work. Like we can't wait on an academic or a linguist to come to the community or to get the resources into and to create the materials.
Mhm.
Um, if you do, you may die before that happens. So that's happened within our language. Um, Nobody did the work, and there was material there. The last speakers are dying. We're waiting. A lot of times we're waiting for an academic to come and create this work for us. Sometimes we have to become the academic. So I would say don't wait for somebody to do whatever needs to be done.
Mhm. Any work you might do, even though it might not be perfect, will be better than anything else. Yeah.
Anything, even recording. I did this with a few other people, and we recorded words that our grandparents remembered,
Hmm.
and it's something, but it helps.
Actually, it's kind of a side. What you just mentioned in your work. Have you worked a lot with what we call here rememberers, people who do not speak Nahuatl but who remember words, expressions, and place names, all these sort of things? Have these people played a role in your work?
Some I have a few, um, mainly within my family. So my grandfather, he passed away last year. He died. He was 96. So he was from the generation that heard the language in his youth, and so he was able to recall some phrases, some words, even the way he would say um, typically now words that are in Mexican Spanish. He would say them in a way in the indigenous way of pronunciation, because in Mexican Spanish they've been distorted, right? So, for example, like if we say a meal that popular meal they call pozole, right here. The indigenous way is pozole, and this is how he would always say it. And all the many of the foods he would say it in the indigenous manner. Those are usually the words that are last to be lost, right? With foods and basic. So yeah. So I have had that experience, and with others, uh, not directly, but with my friends. I ask your grandparents, your aunts, uncles, the older generation, because we're from rural communities, so which tends to uh, preserve aspects of the language longer.
Aye. Oh yeah, I understand. And here in the work done with some dialects that are now gone, we do work with rememberers. So, you will have some of my colleague at Dòrlach, they'll just be roaming the countryside in car and stopping by an old person thinking, oh, maybe they can tell me someone that has a word or two. And they end up sitting for 6 hours recording hundreds of words and expressions from that one person that just remembers. So it's often, I find, underestimated. People want a fluent speaker when you're like, oh, you can get so much from somebody who's not.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Mhm.
That's great that you had access to people that could also pass on that knowledge. And with it, I find there is a healing process as well, because it's people who don't get the language, there is a shame possibly that was passed down, though the language wasn't, and being, no matter what knowledge they have, as little as it is. And often I find here people think whatever they know is nothing. It's no value. Having somebody sitting with them and saying, what you have is everything to me, helps so much of the healing after so much violence and so much shame. So it's very valuable.
And some of the people that I spoke to, including my grandfather, they're not even aware that these words that they remember are from another language. Or they because they maybe think, oh, this is just how people speak here. This is Mexican Spanish. They're not aware because of the cultural genocide, if you will, that's culturation that's happened.
That's story that I know the story. So I mean, thank you for talking to me about all these things. Do you have any maybe closing remarks, something you want people to know, basically?
Well, for the world, just that there's a plethora of languages, and what I always tell people is wherever you are, take time to learn about the local language from the place that you live, the land that you live on. Like right now, I'm in Kumeyaay territory, and I take the time to learn some of the words of the Kumeyaay people here, and then even though I may never see them, which I do though, at least it kind of helps to acknowledge. I guess they'll call it land acknowledgement, but also language acknowledgement, because language and lands are somewhat tied together. So I think if you live like in a Gaelic speaking place where the language and there's something going on with the revitalization, I would say be involved. This shows utmost to me as indigenous person. This shows utmost respect for my culture. If you're actually living in my territory, or maybe you are from here as well, and you're trying to learn even a phrase.
Well, Shinakate, as we would say, that's it exactly. Well, Pampa Dios.
Pampa Dios,
thank you very much, Kurumakit. And it was a great talk. And I hope all the best, and we will spread the word about Jalisco Nahuatl as much as we can on our site. So
thank you.
Cheers, man.